Trade problems between countries. Canada and the United States are neighbors and often help each other. But now they have problems about buying and selling things called trade. The U.S. government has decided to add new taxes, called tariffs, to things coming from Canada. This makes Canadian things more expensive in the U.S. Canada is not happy about this. So, Canada has also decided to put tariffs on things from the U.S. Now, things from the U.S. are more expensive in Canada. The leader of Canada, Prime Minister Trudeau, talked about this. He said it's like a fight about trade between the two countries. This book is about these trade fights, called trade wars. Trade wars are not easy to understand. They are complicated. It's not always clear who is right or wrong. We will look at different ideas about this problem. Tariffs are very important in trade wars. A tariff is like paying extra money for things coming from other countries. Tariffs are not new. A long time ago, there were tariffs called Smoot-Hawley tariffs. They made trade problems even worse. In this book, we will ask important questions. Why do trade wars start? Who wins and who loses when countries have a trade war? Can countries solve problems in other ways instead of having trade wars? What is a trade war? To understand a trade war, we need to know some words. First, a tariff is a tax on things brought into a country from other countries. Imagine if a shop in your country buys toys from another country. A tariff is extra money they have to pay to the government when the toys arrive. Another thing used in trade talks is a quota. This is when there is a limit on how much of something can be brought into a country. For example, a country might say it will only allow a certain number of cars from another country each year. Subsidies are also important. These are when governments give money to help their own businesses. For example, they might give money to farmers to help them grow food cheaper. This can make their food cheaper than food from other countries. A trade deficit is when a country buys more things from other countries than it sells to them. If a country buys more than it sells, this is a trade deficit. When countries use tariffs, quotas, or subsidies to protect their own businesses from other countries, it's called protectionism. They want to make things made in their own country more attractive to buyers than things from other countries. The opposite of protectionism is free trade. Free trade is when things can be bought and sold between countries without these barriers like tariffs and quotas. The idea is to make trade easier and cheaper around the world. Basic money ideas can help us understand trade wars. Supply and demand is important. If a country puts a tariff on things from other countries, those things become more expensive. This can make people want to buy less of these things, and maybe buy cheaper things made in their own country instead. Comparative advantage is another idea. This means countries should make the things they are best at making and trade with other countries for everything else. If they do this, it should be good for everyone. Tariffs change prices. As we said, a tariff makes things from other countries cost more. For example, if there is a tariff on shoes from another country, the price of those shoes in shops will probably go up. This can change what people buy. They might buy fewer shoes, or buy cheaper shoes or shoes made in their own country if they can. There are reasons for and against protectionism. One reason for protectionism is national security. A country might want to protect important businesses that are needed for safety or basic needs, even if it means things cost more. Another reason is job protection. Tariffs can make things from other countries more expensive, so people buy things made in their own country, which can save jobs in those businesses. The new business idea is that new businesses in a country need to be protected to grow and compete with big businesses in other countries. Lastly, Some people say protectionism is needed to stop unfair competition. If a country thinks another country is using unfair help or ways to make their things cheaper, they might use tariffs to fight back. But it's important to know that trade and trade rules are complicated. There are often different ideas, and no one is always right. Trade wars use these tools and ideas, and understanding these basics is the first step to understanding what they mean. The past. In the past, countries had trade problems many times. These problems sometimes became trade wars. Let's look at some examples. One example is the Opium Wars in China. A long time ago, Britain wanted to trade with China, especially to get tea. But China didn't want to buy much from Britain. So, Britain started selling opium, which is a drug, to China. Many people in China became addicted to it. The Chinese government said no to opium and stopped British ships with opium. Then, Britain used its ships to fight China. These were the Opium Wars. China had to agree to trade with Britain after losing the war. This shows that sometimes stronger countries can force weaker countries to trade. Another example is the Corn Laws in Britain. In the 1800s, Britain put high taxes on grain from other countries, called corn in Britain. This was to help British farmers, but it made food very expensive for everyone else. People protested because they couldn't buy cheap food from other countries. After some time, Britain changed the rules and let cheaper grain come in. This helped the British economy grow. This shows that trade rules can change and affect people's lives. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in the United States is another example. In 1930, the U.S. government put high taxes on many things from other countries. They wanted to protect American companies during a bad economic time called the Great Depression. But other countries did the same and put taxes on American things. Trade around the world became much less. Many people think this made the Great Depression worse. This shows that when countries put up barriers to trade, it can hurt everyone. Japan was also made to open up to trade. For many years, Japan didn't want to trade with other countries. But in the 1850s, ships from the United States came to Japan. They asked Japan to open its ports for trade. At first, Japan said no, but the U.S. ships were very strong. Japan had to agree to trade with the U.S. This shows that sometimes countries are forced to trade even if they don't want to. After the Second World War, many countries tried to make trade easier. They made rules in groups like GATT and later the WTO. The idea was to lower taxes on trade and make it fairer for everyone. The WTO was supposed to help solve trade problems between countries. But even with these rules, trade is still not always fair. From these examples, we can learn some things. Trade wars can have unexpected bad results. When one country puts taxes on things, other countries might do the same. This is called fighting back. It's hard to know exactly what will happen when countries start trade wars. History shows us that trade is complicated, and decisions about trade can have big effects on people and countries. Players in the game. In a trade war, many different people and groups are involved. These are not just countries, but also companies and groups of people inside countries. First, there are big countries like the United States, China, and the European Union. These are important players because they trade a lot with other countries. They have big economies, and what they do can affect the whole world. Canada, Mexico, and Japan are also important players. They have strong economies and trade a lot, especially with the bigger players. Each player wants different things. For example, the United States wants to protect its businesses, like steel and car makers. They might use tariffs to make it more expensive to buy these things from other countries. China, on the other hand, wants to sell its products everywhere. They might not like tariffs that stop them from selling to countries like the US. The European Union is a group of countries that trade together. They want free trade between countries in Europe and also with other parts of the world. Countries that are still becoming richer are also players. They might depend on selling things like coffee, cotton, or clothes to richer countries. Trade wars can be hard for them because they might not be as strong as bigger players. Companies that work in many countries, called multinational companies, are very important. Companies like Nike, car companies, or tech companies make things in one country and sell them in many others. Trade wars can change how they do business. For example, if there are tariffs, a company might need to raise prices or move its factories to a different country to avoid paying tariffs. Inside each country, different groups of people are affected by trade wars. Farmers can be affected if tariffs are put on food. Factories and workers can be affected if tariffs are put on things they make or use. Everyone who buys things, called consumers, can also be affected. Tariffs can make things in shops more expensive. Sometimes, groups of people try to get their government to change trade rules. For example, companies that make steel in the US might ask the government to put tariffs on steel from other countries to help them sell more steel. This is called asking for help or lobbying. Trade wars can affect different parts of the economy in different ways. For example, farming, car making, and technology can all be affected by tariffs and trade actions. Knowing who the players are and what they want is important to understand why trade wars happen and what might happen because of them. Rules of trade. International trade needs rules. Imagine a game without rules. It would be messy. Rules in trade help countries work together. They try to make trade fair and something you can expect. One important set of rules comes from the World Trade Organization, or WTO. The WTO is like a club for countries that trade. Most countries in the world are members. The WTO has rules about tariffs and other trade barriers. These rules try to lower barriers and make trade easier. The WTO has had some good results. It has helped to lower tariffs around the world. This has made things cheaper for people in many countries. It has also helped to increase trade between countries. But the WTO also has problems. Some people say the rules are not always fair. They say rich countries have more power than poor countries in the WTO. Disagreements between countries about trade rules happen often. When countries disagree about trade, they can use the WTO's problem-solving system. This system is like a court for trade problems. A country can complain if another country breaks the rules. The WTO can decide if the rules were broken. But it's not always easy to make countries follow the WTO's decisions. Sometimes countries ignore the rules or find ways around them. There is also talk about fair trade and free trade. Free trade means trade without many rules or barriers. The idea is that this helps everyone because it makes things cheaper and economies grow. But some people want fair trade. They say that trade should not just be free, but also fair. They think rules are needed to protect workers, the environment, and small businesses. They think free trade can sometimes hurt these things. Fair trade can mean different things to different people. Some people think it means making sure workers in all countries get good pay and safe places to work. Others think it means protecting businesses in their own country from other countries. It is hard to make trade completely fair for everyone. Countries have different ideas about what is fair. It is also hard to check if all countries are following the rules. Sometimes, countries try to protect their own businesses or get an advantage in trade. This can cause trade problems. International trade rules are important. They try to make a system that is open and something you can expect. But the system is not perfect. There are still problems in making trade fair and in making sure all countries follow the rules. Finding the right balance between free trade and fair trade is something people are always talking about. Winners and losers. Trade wars are about countries putting taxes, called tariffs, on things from other countries. When this happens, some people and businesses win, but many lose. It's not always easy to see who wins and who loses, and it can be different now and later. People who buy things, called consumers, often lose in trade wars. When tariffs are put on things from other countries, these things become more expensive. For example, if the U.S. puts a tariff on shoes from China, shoes in the U.S. shops can cost more. This means people have to pay more for the same things. A small tax at the border can become a much bigger price increase in the shops. Businesses can also lose. Companies that bring things in from other countries have to pay tariffs. This can make their products more expensive and harder to sell. For example, a company that sells cars made in another country might sell fewer cars if there is a tariff. Some big companies might move their factories to other countries to avoid tariffs, like Harley-Davidson did. Small businesses can also have problems if they can't pay the new tariffs or if their costs go up. Workers in some businesses might win for a short time. If tariffs protect businesses in their own country, some companies might make more things in their own country. For example, if there is a tariff on steel, maybe more steel will be made in the U.S. However, other workers can lose. If other countries put tariffs on things from the first country, then businesses that sell things to other countries will sell less. For example, farmers in the U.S. lost money when China put tariffs on American soybeans. Many jobs can be lost in these businesses that sell to other countries. Farmers are often affected by trade wars. When countries put tariffs on food, farmers can find it hard to sell their products to other countries. The trade war between the U.S. and China showed this clearly. Farmers in the U.S. had problems selling their soybeans to China because of the tariffs. Governments sometimes try to help farmers with money, but this costs the government a lot. Governments can get more money from tariffs for a short time. However, trade wars can also cost governments money. They might have to help businesses and people who lose money because of the trade war. Also, trade wars can damage friendships between countries. This can make it harder to help each other with other important things. In trade wars, there are often no real winners. Some people and businesses might gain a little, but many others lose. Consumers pay more, some businesses have problems, and some workers lose their jobs. The good and bad things are not shared equally, and often the bad things are bigger than any good things. The real cost. Trade wars have bad effects, called costs. These costs are not just about money. They affect many parts of life. One cost is money-related, called economic. When countries put tariffs on things, trade becomes less. Things become more expensive. For example, if country A puts a tariff on cars from country B, cars from country B cost more in country A. People in country A might pay more for cars. Businesses in country A that use parts from country B also pay more. This can slow down how the economy grows. People can lose jobs if companies cannot sell as much. Prices for everyday things like food and clothes can go up. Markets can become shaky, and the value of savings can go down. Trade wars also have costs for how countries get along, called political costs. When countries fight over trade, they can become less friendly. Trust between countries can disappear. It becomes harder for countries to help each other with other problems. Sometimes, Trade wars can make political problems worse. Countries might become angry and want to fight back, meaning they put tariffs on things from the first country too. This can lead to more and more tariffs, and the problem gets worse. Groups that help countries trade fairly can become weaker. There are also costs for people and society, called social costs. Some people lose more than others in trade wars. Workers in some jobs might lose their jobs. Families might find it harder to pay for things. This can make things unfair and make people unhappy. People might move to find work, which can change communities. Trade wars can also have bigger effects. They can change how countries act towards each other in the world. Friendships between countries can become weaker. Other countries that are not in the trade war might get an advantage. Some people even call trade wars economic warfare. This means using money actions to hurt another country, like in a real war, but without weapons. In short, trade wars are not simple. They have many real costs that affect money, politics, and people's lives. These costs are important to think about when thinking about trade. A better way? Trade wars cause many problems. We have seen that when countries put tariffs on products from other countries, things become difficult. Prices for normal people can go up. Businesses can lose money. Sometimes, countries stop being friends and start to argue. This is not good for anyone. Is there a better way to deal with trade problems? Maybe. Instead of trade wars, countries can talk to each other. They can make agreements together. This means sitting down and talking about the problems. It's not always easy, but it can be better than tariffs. One important thing is to work together with other countries. There are groups like the World Trade Organization, WTO. These groups try to help countries agree on rules for trade. When countries work together, it can be fairer for everyone. It's like playing a game with rules that everyone knows. Sometimes, trade problems happen because of unfair things. For example, one country might help its companies too much with money. This is called subsidies. Or, a country might copy ideas or products from another country without permission. This is stealing ideas. These things can make trade unfair. Countries need to talk about these problems and find ways to solve them. The world is changing. Technology and the world becoming more connected are making trade more complicated. Products are often made in many different countries. This means countries need to work together even more. They need to understand each other and find ways to cooperate. Trade is important for everyone. It can help countries grow and become richer. But trade wars can stop this from happening. Maybe there is a better way than fighting. Talking, agreeing, and working together might be a better way for the future. It's not simple, but it is important to try to find a better way for everyone to trade fairly.
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.